together! Harder now! Pull together now!
Secure that line. Watch the weight distribution. Steady. Strong current. To the pyramids now we go. Pull, brothers, pull! Strong arms for the stone. Giza awaits.
The wind moves differently here. It sweeps across the plateau, and not as erosion, but as remembrance, as if the desert itself is exhaling something ancient. Beneath the sands of Giza, silence hides a miracle. Not a myth, not a mystery, a miracle. One that has stood longer than any kingdom, survived more than any empire, and defied time without asking permission. They were not built to impress. They were built to last forever. Before the world had names for science, Africa had mastered it. Before the word engineer existed, Africans had already engineered eternity into stone. And before the myth of alien architects, there were real men, black minds, African hands, who shaped the earth into geometry so precise, so eternal, that even modern tools strain to understand how. What did they know that we have forgotten? These are not tombs waiting for tourists. They are equations in limestone. They are cosmic instruments built on land that speaks in angles and light. They are monuments to thought, human thought, designed to bridge life and afterlife, earth and star. Yet the world calls them mysterious, as if African brilliance must always be an accident, or worse, an illusion. But there was no mystery. There was mastery. So today we do not chase conspiracies, we follow knowledge, we do not whisper myths, we raise memory. Because on the day these pyramids were born, the desert remembered its purpose. The Nile listened. The sky aligned. And Africa became the first civilization to look at the stars and build something that could reach them. The question is no longer if Africans built the greatest structure in human history. They did. The question is how they did it and why. Before Kemet was stone, it was soil. Rich, dark, fertile. A sacred stripe of black earth carved by the Nile through the burning gold of the Sahara. The people who lived along this ribbon of life called it KMT, the Black Land, not just for its soil but for themselves. The Kemetu, the black people. This was not a metaphor. It was identity. It was geography. It was truth. Long before the desert we see today, the Sahara was green, lush with rivers, lakes, and savannas. In that distant age, African peoples migrated from deep within the continent, drawn northward by water, animals, and sky. As the climate shifted, the desert reclaimed its heat, and those early Africans followed the only path where life still flowed, the Nile. This river was not just sustenance, it was knowledge in motion, a moving laboratory, a corridor of ideas stretching from Uganda to the Mediterranean. Along its banks, communities formed, then kingdoms, then empires. Kemet was not an island of greatness. It was an African flower, blooming from African roots. Its people shared bloodlines, rituals, and technologies with their Nubian, Ethiopian, and Saharan neighbors. You cannot separate Kemet from Africa. You cannot understand its brilliance without understanding where it came from and who it came from. And from that soil, a new class of mind emerged, the priest engineers. These were not separate roles. To build was to believe. To calculate was to connect with the divine. The priest engineer studied stars, measured the floods, and encoded cosmic laws into architecture. They were scientists who spoke in mathematics and myth, who saw no boundary between spirit and structure. They were the ones who would one day design pyramids not just as graves, but as resurrection machines. But even before that first stone was ever placed, the foundation had already been laid. In the minds of a people who saw land not just as property, but as prophecy, Kemet was African, in skin, in spirit, in science, and the Black Land was never silent. It spoke in granite, in glyphs, and in genius. And today it speaks again. Long before the name architect had ever been carved into stone, one African man had already defined it for all time. His name was Imhotep, priest, physician, mathematician, astronomer, builder, scribe, visionary. He lived more than 4,600 years ago and walked the science of Kemet not as a myth, but as a mind so advanced, later generations would deify him. In a world still emerging from mud and reeds, Imhotep was designing in eternity. His most famous commission came from Pharaoh Djoser, the second king of Kemet's third dynasty. Djoser wanted more than a tomb. He wanted to mark a new era. Until then, royal burials had been simple mastabas, low rectangular brick structures rising only slightly above the desert floor. But Djoser dreamed bigger, and Imhotep answered that dream with stone. Under Imhotep's direction, the world's first monumental stone building rose at Saqqara. Not flat, but layered. A six-tiered pyramid reaching 200 feet into the desert sky. The Steppe Pyramid was not just a new shape, it was a new philosophy. It symbolized ascent, a visual hymn of rising. Each level represented a cosmic step, a stage of transformation. The pyramid became a ladder, not just to the afterlife, but to divinity itself. But it wasn't just what Imhotep built, it was how he built it. Until that moment in history, no civilization had ever dared to construct entirely in stone on such a scale. Imhotep didn't inherit this technology. He invented it. He mastered the principles of weight, compression, and alignment. His teams quarried limestone blocks, transported them with precision, and set them with mathematics that spoke the language of the stars. Every angle had meaning. Every shadow had purpose. It was engineering, yes, but it was also astronomy, theology, and medicine fused into architecture. Because Imhotep wasn't simply a builder, he was a polymath in the purest African sense. In temple schools, he studied the stars, charting celestial bodies with instruments like the Merkhet, long before telescopes existed. As a healer, he authored one of the earliest known medical texts, detailing over 90 anatomical conditions and surgical techniques centuries before Hippocrates. In the House of Life, he oversaw scribes who recorded laws, rituals, and equations. And in his mind, none of these things were separate. He designed not only with stone, but with time. Not just for the eye, but for the soul. Imhotep's step pyramid was a prototype, not just for all the pyramids that followed, but for African innovation itself. He proved that engineering was not the opposite of spirituality, it was its embodiment. Thousands of years later, when the Greeks came upon his name, they worshipped him as a god. They had to, because nothing else made sense to them. But to Kemet, Imhotep was not a mystery. He was a son of the Black Land, a man who looked at sand and saw a staircase to the heavens. A man who did not design for the present, he designed forever. Imhotep's step pyramid opened the door. And through that door came an age of ambition the world had never seen before. It was the 4th dynasty, and Kemet stood at the height of its power. Rich in resources, unified by faith, and governed by a state so organized it could redirect entire landscapes. This wasn't just about architecture. It was about will, and Africa was ready to build for eternity. First came Khufu, the son of Sneferu. He inherited not only a throne, but a dream to surpass everything that had come before. And so, under his command, the Great Pyramid at Giza rose from the desert, 481 feet high, 2.3 million blocks, weighing over 6 million tons. There had never been anything like it. There never would be again. No metal cranes, no diesel engines, just human vision, science, and stone. But Khufu's ambition was not an anomaly. His successors continued the legacy. Khafre built his pyramid beside his father's, adding the majestic Sphinx, part lion, part king, carved from a single stone. Then came Menkaure, who constructed the smallest of the Giza pyramids, but with unmatched precision and elegance. These were not isolated projects. They were part of a coordinated engineering campaign that lasted generations. And these pyramids weren't alone. They were just the crown jewels of much larger complexes, entire cities of spirit and stone. Surrounding them were mortuary temples where priests performed rituals for the king's soul. Both pits, where full-sized vessels were buried to carry the pharaoh into the afterlife. Quarries, carved deep into the earth, where the stones were born. And grand causeways that linked the pyramids to the Nile. Roads of resurrection that tied the earthly and the divine. The builders of these marvels were not slaves. They were respected workers, organized into crews, housed in well-structured villages, and fed high-protein diets of beef and fish. Their tombs lie near the pyramids, marked with pride, not shame. They were artisans, engineers, Africans. This was the age when Kemet dared to do what no one else on earth could imagine. Not just to build bigger, but to build the impossible. And they did it not for glory, but for the gods. To build a monument that would outlast empires, you begin with the earth itself. The Great Pyramid didn't begin at its base, it began beneath it, in the bedrock of Giza. The limestone plateau was both foundation and source, providing the raw material for the pyramid's massive core. Here, African workers used copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and hammers to extract thousands upon thousands of limestone blocks. These were not crude tools, but instruments wielded with knowledge passed down for generations. The limestone, though relatively soft compared to granite, still demanded patience and precision. Chisels were sharpened constantly. The pounders, hard stones from Nubia, were used to break larger masses into manageable sizes. Far to the south, another material was being prepared: granite. This stone, harder and heavier than limestone, came from the quarries of Aswan, over 800 kilometers away. It would be used for the inner chambers, lintels, and critical structural components. To extract it, ancient quarry workers employed fire cracking, building fires against the stone face, then rapidly cooling it with water to fracture it cleanly. This advanced technique, used thousands of years before industrial machinery, shows a deep understanding of thermal stress and rock behavior. Today, in Aswan, you can still see the unfinished obelisk, a 1,200-ton monument frozen mid-quarry, complete with chisel marks and unfinished bricks. But it wasn't just the materials that told the story. The walls of these quarries bear graffiti left by workers, inscriptions, jokes, names of crews. These were Africans who signed their labor. They weren't faceless slaves. They were organized, proud, and remembered. Once the blocks were cut, the question became, how do you move millions of tons of stone? The answer again lay in Africa's genius. At Giza, the builders used sledges, large wooden sleds that could carry heavy blocks across sand. But dry sand would resist and drag. So they poured water in front of the sledges, soaking the sand just enough to reduce friction by nearly 50%. This simple act turned an impossible haul into a controlled glide. It wasn't a miracle, it was physics. For the granite blocks coming from Aswan, the journey was far more epic. These stones, weighing up to 70 tons, were loaded onto massive boats during the Nile's flood season. The ancient engineers didn't fight the river, they used it. They designed boats wide enough and buoyant enough to float granite upriver, timing their movements with the rise of the floodwaters. Once near Giza, a man-made canal system carried the stone even closer, possibly right to the foot of the pyramid itself. Archaeological teams have since uncovered traces of this canal system buried beneath the desert, proof that Africa engineered waterways as precisely as it shaped stone. Transport was only the beginning. Before a single block could be stacked, the ground had to be made perfect. The desert floor was not naturally level, but the Great Pyramid's foundation is level within mere millimeters. How? One method involved digging shallow trenches across the base, then filling them with water. Because water finds its own level, the builders could then mark a perfectly flat line across the entire foundation. Excess rock was then cut away and the bedrock sculpted to precision. This was not trial and error, it was controlled calibration across acres of terrain. With the ground ready, the real question began. How were the blocks raised? Theories abound, and no single method has been universally confirmed. But the most likely truth is a combination of techniques. One theory proposes a long straight ramp built from earth and rubble, stretching out for kilometers. Another suggests a zigzagging ramp that wrapped around the pyramid as it rose. The most compelling modern theory, however, is the internal spiral ramp, a system of corridors built within the structure itself, allowing blocks to be pulled upward as the pyramid was constructed from the inside out. Other hypotheses include the use of lever and counterweight systems, and even buoyancy-based water shafts, though the latter remains speculative. What matters more than which method was used is what these theories prove: that no aliens were needed, no lost magic, just human ingenuity. African ingenuity. The builders of Kemet applied every ounce of physics, planning, and persistence to raise 2.3 million blocks, many weighing over 2 tons, to heights never before achieved. As the pyramid grew, its surface began to transform. The outer casing stones, made of highly polished Tura limestone, were fitted with surgical precision. These weren't rough bricks. They were gleaming white panels, fitted so tightly that even a razor blade couldn't slide between them. The sun would strike the pyramid and reflect blinding brilliance across the desert, making it appear almost celestial. A mountain of light rising from the earth. Ancient texts describe the pyramid as the shining horizon of Khufu. It wasn't poetry, it was fact. And atop this gleaming monument, a final piece, the capstone, or benben. This stone, possibly plated in electrum or gold, would have caught the first and last rays of the sun each day, anchoring the pyramid to the heavens. The benben symbolized the primordial mound, the very first piece of land to rise from the waters of chaos at the beginning of creation, according to Kemetic cosmology. It wasn't just a stone, it was a sacred beacon, connecting the pyramid to the origin of life itself. When it was finished, the Great Pyramid stood as the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. Its 4 sides aligned almost perfectly to true north, more accurately in fact than the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. Its base varies by less than 13 inches across more than 13 acres. No modern skyscraper has been built with such foundational precision. Not because we can't, but because it's rarely attempted. The pyramid is not a mystery. It's a miracle of math, labor, timing, and belief. And none of these was accidental. Every detail was designed. Every decision was intentional. The people who built this knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't slaves driven by fear. They were engineers driven by purpose. They studied the stars, they read the river, they tamed the earth, and they made time obey. This was how the pyramids were built. Not by magic, not by aliens, but by Africans who understood that when stone is shaped with vision, it doesn't just resist time, it defines it. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is not just an architectural marvel. It is an astronomical instrument. Every angle, every alignment, every shadow cast across its surface was crafted not only to endure time, but to communicate with the cosmos. These pyramids were not merely built for kings. They were built for the heavens. Start with orientation. The sides of the Great Pyramid align with true north more accurately than the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, a feat that seems impossible without modern tools. Yet the Kemetic priests, thousands of years ago, achieved this using simple instruments, the merket and the bay. The merket, a plumb line stretched with a sighting groove, allowed them to track the movement of stars. By observing circumpolar stars, those that never set, they found the celestial pole. The bay, a horizontal sighting tool, worked in tandem to mark key stellar positions. Through this sacred astronomy, they oriented the monument the size of a mountain with pinpoint precision. But the builders didn't stop at north. They reached deeper into the stars. The layout of the three pyramids at Giza mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt, a constellation deeply associated with Osiris, god of resurrection and the afterlife. In aligning these earthly structures with a heavenly pattern, the builders created a spiritual corridor. Life and death, earth and sky were now forever linked. Inside the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts were carved from the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber, extending outward into space. These shafts were not for ventilation. They were for alignment. One points towards Sirius, the star of Isis, while another aims at the circumpolar stars, the undying ones, where the souls of the pharaohs were believed to dwell eternally. These were not guesses. These were calculations. These were prayers in stone. To understand the pyramid is to understand that it was not just a tomb. It was a cosmic equation. It encoded celestial rhythms, divine laws, and the journey of the soul. It was Africa's observatory, Africa's altar, Africa's message to the stars. And it is still delivering that message. In silence, in symmetry, and in light. If the pyramids were the heart of Kemet's engineering miracle, then the Nile was its bloodstream, carrying life, labor, and stone across the body of a civilization. No pyramid could have risen without the river. It wasn't just a background feature in the story of Giza. It was the engine that made the impossible possible. Each year, like clockwork, the Nile would rise. Its annual inundation flooded the fields and deposited rich silt, transforming the land into a ribbon of fertility. This dependable flood cycle didn't just feed the people, it structured their entire economy. With abundant harvests, Kemet generated agricultural surpluses so large that tens of thousands of skilled and unskilled workers could be fed year-round. This surplus freed time, energy, and talent to be redirected into national projects, like the pyramids. But food wasn't the only gift the Nile gave. During flood season, the river became a vast liquid highway. Massive granite blocks from Aswan, some weighing up to 70 tons, were loaded onto boats and floated north, powered by the water's natural current. These weren't ordinary vessels. They were engineered to bear incredible weight, built from massive timbers, and designed to take advantage of the river's flood cycle. Time and tide worked in harmony with human will. As the pyramids neared completion, a network of canals, reservoirs, and docks extended from the Nile directly into the heart of Giza. These artificial waterways allowed boats to pull right up to the construction site, where stones could be unloaded and moved with minimal friction. For centuries, this canal system was buried under desert sands, until recent excavations revealed the truth. Kemet didn't just move stone. It moved water, reshaped terrain, and orchestrated hydraulic systems with astonishing foresight. Water engineering was Kemet's secret weapon, not just in building pyramids, but in controlling time, space, and labor. The river was never just water. It was memory, motion, mathematics. The Nile didn't run beside the pyramid project. It ran through it. The two were inseparable. A machine made of nature and mind, working together to build something that would outlast both. For centuries, the world was told that the pyramids were built by slaves, whipped into submission, toiling under the sun for cruel kings. But the sands have since spoken. And what they've revealed destroys the lie. Just beyond the pyramids of Giza, archaeologists uncovered the tombs of the workers. Not kings, not nobles, workers. And they were buried with honor. Their bodies lay in carefully constructed graves surrounded by pottery, tools, and offerings. In Kemet, the dead were only buried with such care if their life had meaning. These builders were not disposable labor. They were respected citizens, remembered by name, by duty, by love. Their diet alone tells a story. They ate beef, bread, fish, and drank beer brewed from emmer wheat. This was not the food of slaves scraping for scraps. It was a workforce sustained by deliberate nourishment. Because Kemet knew, to build the eternal, you had to protect the builder. These were African engineers, architects, surveyors, and stonemasons, rope makers, potters, tool forgers, organizers, and overseers. They were divided into crews called files, and each file into smaller teams, often with names they proudly carved into the stone. Graffiti left behind reads like ancient roll calls. The drunkards of Menkaure, the friends of Khufu. They weren't afraid to be remembered, they expected it. To know this is to shift how we see Africa, not as a land of forced labor, but of organized genius, of skilled workers who turned mathematics into monument and sweat into symmetry. If this is changing the way you see Africa, drop a triangle in the comments. Let's rewrite the story together. Because the builders of the pyramids weren't slaves, they were masters of their craft. And they knew they were building forever. To call the pyramids mere tombs is to miss their meaning entirely. These were not cold houses for the dead. They were machines for resurrection. Built with intention, guided by spirit, and aligned to the cosmos, the pyramids were expressions of African science at its highest frequency, where engineering and spirituality became one. Within the inner chambers of these monuments, inscribed into the walls in sacred hieroglyphs, lie the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious writings on earth. These texts are not eulogies, they are instruction manuals. They describe in vivid detail the transformation of the pharaoh's soul, his Ka, life force, and Ba, personality, as it ascends through the stars to join the gods. The pyramid was not a grave, it was a gateway. Its structure was intentional. The entire design functioned like a cosmic ladder. Its base rested on the earth, but its peak pointed to the sky, to the imperishable stars where the ancestors lived forever. The chambers inside were not random. Each one held symbolic meaning. The king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and the grand gallery were aligned not just physically, but metaphysically. They represented stages of rebirth, echoing the journey of the soul through the cycle of death and divine return. Even the architectural form mirrored the principle of Ma'at, the ancient Kemetic ideal of balance, order, and truth. Every angle, every ratio, every alignment served both a scientific and spiritual function. This was not coincidence. It was African science, a worldview that did not divide the sacred from the structural. So when we look at the pyramid, we must see more than a monument. We must see a device built to elevate the soul, a holy equation where limestone and legacy combine to engineer eternity. Because in Kemet, to build was to believe, and to believe was to rise. There was a time when the Sahara was not sand, but savanna. A vast green expanse with lakes, rivers, and forests stretching across what is now one of the harshest deserts on Earth. This was the world in which early African civilizations, including Kemet, first flourished. But that world began to change. And with it, everything that had once seemed eternal began to shift. Between 3000 and 2000 BCE, the climate underwent a dramatic transformation. Rainfall patterns collapsed, grasslands withered. The once green Sahara began to dry, and sand crept in where water once flowed. It was not a single event, but a slow, relentless wave of desertification that reshaped entire ecosystems and entire civilizations. Cities and settlements that once thrived across the Saharan corridor were slowly buried beneath dunes. Trade routes that had connected the interior of Africa to the Nile Valley dried up or became too dangerous to cross. As these economic arteries collapsed, so too did the wealth and stability they once provided. The Nile itself, though still mighty, began to change as well. Its annual floods became less predictable. The rich agricultural surplus that had powered pyramid construction, that had fed and sustained entire labor forces, began to decline. Without that surplus, the massive state projects that defined the Fourth Dynasty became unsustainable. Pyramid building didn't end because people forgot how to build. It ended because the environment around them no longer supported the scale of vision their ancestors had once achieved. The climate shifted, and with it, the course of African history. This was Africa's first great climate crisis, and it brought an age of stone and star building to a quiet close. The sand didn't just bury monuments, it buried memory. But memory never dies. It only waits. The pyramids stood silent and eternal, but the voices of their creators were slowly drowned out. What began as environmental silence became cultural erasure. As Kemet faded from power, others came, not to remember, but to replace. The Greeks were the first to claim the legacy. When they arrived in Kemet, they marveled at its temples, its math, its medicine. And they took. Scholars like Pythagoras and Plato studied in African temples, learning from Kemetic priests, only to return home and present African wisdom as their own. In Greek hands, African knowledge was rebranded, no longer the work of black minds, but of mythical ancients. Then came the Romans. They closed the sacred temples, outlawed ancient practices, and accelerated the fading of memory. The House of Life, once a hub of knowledge and spiritual science, went dark. Scrolls were lost. Priesthoods vanished. The silence deepened. In time, new conquerors arrived. Arab rulers renamed Kemet Misr, from which we get the modern word Egypt. But this new name had no memory of the Black Land or the Kemetu. Over generations, the African identity of Kemet was peeled away, layer by layer, like limestone from the pyramid's core. Then came the Europeans. With the rise of colonial empires, Egyptology was born, not as an honest science, but as a political tool. They praised the stones but dismissed the builders. They invented fantasies of lost white civilizations or alien architects before admitting the truth. that black Africans built the greatest monuments in history. Museums filled with stolen artifacts. Textbooks emptied of truth. Africa was not forgotten. It was deliberately erased, its genius hidden in plain sight. But memory does not die in silence. It waits beneath the sand, behind the stones, ready to rise again. The pyramids were never silent. Even when covered in sand, even when misnamed and misread, they whispered to those who were still willing to listen. Now, the miracle returns to Africa, not just in stone, but in story. Not just in facts, but in feeling. The memory awakens. These structures are more than monuments. They are memory made visible. Records of a people who understood that the universe was not something to conquer, but something to mirror. The Great Pyramid and its companions at Giza are not just feats of scale or labor. They are proof, irrefutable, immovable proof, that African civilization was scientific, mathematical, and cosmic at once. They prove that knowledge did not arrive in Africa. It was born there. That precision and philosophy, astronomy and architecture could live within the same blueprint. That you can chart the stars and carve them into stone. That you can design in harmony with both gravity and divinity. The pyramids remind us of a time when Africans were not only the builders of the world, but the definers of what a world could be. When to build was not simply to shelter life, but to echo the laws of the universe. When stone was not just material, it was meaning. And today, those meanings return to those ready to remember, to those willing to see Kemet not as a myth, but as a mirror that reflects not just a forgotten past, but a still possible future. Because if our ancestors could command millions of stones into perfect form without machines, then we too can rebuild what has been broken. The pyramids were not built to honor death. They were built to celebrate eternity. And eternity always remembers.